Hello guys, we will continue our discussion with regards to Java methods. So for this lecture, our lesson objectives are as follows. To understand the other types of methods in Java, to understand the difference between accessor and mutator, and also to understand the use of method overloading in solving problems in Java. So we'll be technically talking more about the Java methods. Let's start first with a static method. A static method that has a static keyword is of course known as a static method. In other words, a method that belongs to a class rather than an instance of a class is known as a static method. We can also create static method by using the keyword static before the method name. So to further show you how a static method is being used in Java programming, let me show you an example of static method. And you know that our main method is actually the best example of a static method. So in this example that you can see, we have a public class display, and it's showing us how to use a static method. If you remember, we were able to show an example of a static method already from our last discussion. So in this case, the advantage of, or the main advantage rather of a static method is that we can call it out without creating an object. So, meaning, it can access static data members and pwede din nating mabago yung value nun. So, it is used to create an instance method, and being invoked by, or if you invoke the static method, ginagamit natin yung class name niya. So, again, to the best example of that, static method is the main method. So, since we were able to show or to actually use static methods on our previous example, let's go ahead and proceed to the other example or type of methods. This one is actually the instance method. So let me read to you what the slide is showing us. The method of the class is known as an instance method. So it is a non-static method which is defined inside the class. Before we actually call or invoke the instance method, it is necessary to create an object of its class. So let's see an example of this instance method. So for the instance method, what better to understand this is of course to create an example of a Java code for this one. So let me use the Programming's Java Online Compilers again. And then, dito po, edit na lang natin yung ilan sa mga kailangan natin gawin. No? So, I will be creating a class instance method example. Okay, so instance method example. The next thing that we will do is to declare a global variable. So we have never done this before. This is what we call a global variable since it is actually declared inside the class. So every time na magkakaroon ka ng or magkikreate ka ng method, you don't need to initialize it because it's already there. So, kilala siya sa buong class na meron ka. So, lahat ng method na meron ka sa instance method example is kilala si variable s. So, ito po as an example of a user-defined method dahil we are not using the static keyword. Okay, so, create na ako ng user-defined method, public int. So, this, the return type of our method is an integer. So, this is add method. Tatawagan ko siyang add method. So, meron tayong integer A and integer B. So, which will hold the value of our two numbers. So, ito yung dalawa yung parameters ng ating add method. So, ang parameters natin ay si integer A and integer B. The next thing that we will do is, of course, to create the method body. So, create lang ako dito ng simple formula, yung SCO, which is actually short for sum. Suppose sum, so A plus B. So, that's going to be my simple formula. Mag-aano lang tayo. Nag-create tayo dito ng method that will return the sum of two numbers. Returning the sum of two numbers. So, return S. So, bakit return S? Kasi yun yung variable na ginamit natin to hold the value of A plus B. So, now that we are done creating our user-defined method, pupunta na tayo sa ating main program or main method. As you can see, dito sa loob ng public integer A, integer add method rather, hindi na po ako nag-declare ng S kasi ito na po yung pag-declare ko. Nasa labas na po siya ng ating method. Pero still, nasa loob pa rin ng isang class. So, dito sa ating main method, ang gagawin natin is mag-create tayo ng object of our class. Create an object of the class that we have. Okay, so in this case, ang pangalan ng class natin ay instance method example. So, yun yung gagawa natin ng object. To do that, you have to, let me copy this para hindi tayo magkamali sa spelling. So, paste it, instance method. Tatawagin kong obj or object yung ating instance. So, I think, if I am not mistaken, nagawa na rin natin to before sa mga dati pa nating examples on our discussion. So, that's how you are going to create an object of the class that you have. So, by typing in the name of your class, assigning like an identifier, like a variable to that, equals to the new keyword, and then the name of, again, of your class. So, in this case, nag-create tayo ng object para sa ating class, which we will call on later on. So, now, the next thing that we're going to do is to invoke. Pag sinabi natin invoke, this is also means call our instance method. So, by calling our instance method, gagamitin na lang natin yung obj na word to invoke the instance method. So, sa loob ng system.out.println, papalitan ko lang yung label natin into the sum is, and then syempre, dahil meron na tayong method is actually going to do our procedure, tatawagin na lang natin po yun. So, plus, anong pangalan ng ating object? So, that is obj. Ito po yan. So, object dot add, which is this. Tinatawag naman natin this time yung ating method add. And then, maglalagay lang po tayo ng value dito. For example, 50 and 99. So, ito yung ating arguments, 50 and 99, which will be thrown to the parameters that we have under this method, yung ating integer A and integer B. So far, we are actually done with our program. So, an example of an instance method. So, again, sa instance method, we are actually creating an object for that class that you created. So, ibig sabihin kasi, it's a non-static method na meron kang ganitong klaseng method sa iyong class. Hindi siya static. So, meaning, kapag ganyan po, kailangan natin mag-create ng instance ng ating object. Kaya ginagawa natin itong part na ito. Okay. So, para mawala tayong magkakaroon, we are not going to be able to have any problems once we call our method here. So, using the instance method. Okay, that is our example. Let's try to run this and check if there are still errors. So, this is the output of our program, and since na wala naman siyang errors, our output is the sum is 149. So, if we're going to go back and make a um, manual check, 50 plus 99 is actually indeed 149. So, let's go ahead and continue our discussion to our methods, no? So, on this case, tayo naman ay magdi-discuss ng two types of the instance method. So, meron tayong tinatawag na accessor method and mutator method. So, to tell you more about these two, I am going to make like what do you call this, like a program again as an example of accessor and the mutator method. So to discuss further, ang accessor method reads the instance variables, and then we can easily identify it kasi gumagamit tayo ng prefix sa accessor method. Ang prefix na yon is get, no? That is why the example of the method name here is get ID. So, the reason why its prefix is get because it's also known as getters. It returns the value of the private field. So, ginagamit ito to get the value if yun daw field na yun is private. So, kasi there will be instances that you have to declare a field as private. For example, yung mga private variables, private methods. So, kailangan po natin ng accessor method to access yung value ng ating private fields. So, in mutator method, this method reads the instance variables and also nagmo-modify din siya ng value ng variable na yon. We can easily identify it because the method is prefixed with set, no? Yung word na set. Kaya naman natin siya ginagamitan ng prefix na set. It is because it is also known as setters or modifiers. So it does not return anything. Ang ginagawa lang po nito is to accept a parameter of the same data type that depends on the field. So it is used to set the value of the private field. So again, kung meron kang private variables, so, kailangan mo gumamit ng mutator method to access the value of that field if you want to change it. Okay? So, now, let me go ahead and go back to our compiler and we are going to show you kung paano ba siya ginagamit. So, once again, we will be using the programming's online Java compiler. From here, mag-ano na lang tayo, mag-create na lang tayo from scratch. Delete ko na lang yung content ng ating compiler. So, this time tayo po ay gagawa muna ng accessor method. Lagay na lang tayo ng konti dito, comments. Program to demonstrate accessor method. And then public class, public class student. Dito mag-aano tayo, mag-access tayo ng value ng ating student ID and student name. And so, public class student, then mag-create muna tayo ng private class na variable. So, private class variable declaration. So, lalagyan natin siya ng keyword na private, integer, SID, short for student ID, and then private string name or SName, student name for short. Now, some of you may be wondering, ma'am, bakit po kaya kailangan pa silang i-declare as private? Now, ganito yon. There will be fields on your program na kailangan hindi siya makita during the implementation of it. So, parang yung mga confidential information, hindi siya dapat laging available sa mga readers nyo kasi nga it's confidential. So, kaya nagkikreate tayo ng mga ganong klase ng variable. So, on this case, tinitreat natin si student ID and student name as your private variables. So, that is why enable for us to access or get the value of this kind of variables and to set. So, gagamit na tayo na ng accessor and mutator. So, this example is all about accessor. So, for this one, kailangan muna natin mag-create ng constructor, no? So, this is something new, pero ito kasi magkakaroon tayo dito ng bukod pa na, ano tawag dito, na discussion sa constructors. Madadaanan din natin yun. However, we actually need this one to invoke um, the method that we are going to create. So it is like just a regular method, no? But it's being called as a constructor. So student, ang pangalan ng constructor natin, yung parameter natin is string n and, integers s and the string n. So para yun din sa argument natin na student ID and the student name. Okay. Sa loob ng constructor body natin, gagamit tayo ng this na keyword .sid. So, yung SID natin is equals to S because we're telling our program that this SID is also, yung value ni S is mapupunta kay SID rather. So, then tatawagin din natin this S name is equals to N. So, ganun lang din yung process, no? The next thing that we're going to create now is the accessor method. The accessor method to get the student ID and the name of the student. So, for this one, create lang tayo ng a public access. So, ito naman kasi lagi yun, no? Public int get. So, ayan, no? Ginamitan natin siya ng word na get, which we are telling ourselves and the other readers of your program that this is an accessor. So, get ID or SID, return SID. So, ito yun. Now, gamit naman tayo ng accessor method ulit. Ayun na pala sa taas yung explanation ko. Sorry. Baba ko lang yung ating course nito. Public. Dahil string po yung i-return niya, gagamit tayo ng return type na string as well. And this time, papangalanan natin to na get s name. So, ano bang pangalan ng variable natin for s name? S name din, no? But in, tawag doon in lowercase or small letters. So, ito yan, no? Just in case na nagwa-wonder kayo, ma'am, saan galing yung SID? Andito sa taas, SID. Saan po galing yung S-name? Ito po yung S-name natin. Okay? So, the next thing that we will do is, of course, to create our main method kung saan natin i-access yung lahat ng yun. Alright. Now, if you will take a look at it, no, yung ating private integer na student ID at yung string student name, actually wala pa silang laman. So, nag-declare ka lang like ng variable para para mag-build container ng student ID value at student name value. So, ang gagawin natin sa loob ng ating main method is mag-a-assign tayo ng content nun, dalawang variables natin. So, in this case, to do that, mag-create na muna tayo ng main method. So, let me continue our code here. So, it's public static void main string. So, alright. And then, the next thing that we will do is to The next thing that we will do is, of course, to uh, create an instance of our class, no? Bakit tayo ma'am gagawa ng instance ng class natin? Kasi non-static yung ating mga methods. Ibig sabihin, kailangan natin mag-create ng instance ng ating mismong class para magamit natin itong ating accessor method. So, for this one, ang pangalan po ng ating class is student. So, tatawagin natin yung student class name natin. And then, mag-create lang ako dito ng instance niya. Tatawagin ko ulit itong obj as an object. New student. And then, sa loob ng ating parameter, ilalagay ko yung value ni student ID at yung student name. For example, ang student ID niya ay 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, yung kanyang name ay Andrea. So, on this case, kailangan kung ano yung pagkakasunod ng inyong parameter sa taas, katulad nito, no? Integer S, so that is your student ID, and then yung string name, that is the student name, kailangan magkasunod din. Katulad ng naituro ko sa inyo last time sa ating method declaration and calling of the method. Okay, so on this one, nakapag-create na tayo ng ating object for to make an instance of our class. Nakapag-assign na rin tayo ng value ng ating student ID at student name. Ang next step na gagawin natin is to call the accessor method. So, paano natin gagawin yon? Siyempre, we want something to output on the screen of our user. Gamit lang tayo ng system.out.println for that. And then, lagay lang tayo ng label, student ID, no, para mas madali siyang i-recognize. And then, i-concatenate natin yung ginamit nating object, which is obj dot, at yung pangalan ng ating accessor, which is, if we are going to go back here, ang pangalan ng ating accessor is get SID. So, tatawagin natin si get SID the way we created our method above, and then we'll repeat the process for the student name. So, syempre, i-copy lang natin, and then mag-edit lang tayo ng kaunti para sa student name naman. Student name, tapos dito, instead na get SID, get S name yung pangalan ng ating accessor. So, get SID and get S name. Now, I'm not yet checking it one line per line, pero our compiler will do that for us. So, i-run na natin yung program. Okay, since there are no errors whatsoever, nakapag-create na tayo ng tamang program for an accessor method. So, yun yung ating student ID 12345 and the student name Andrea. So, ma'am, bakit parang medyo naging complex yung program natin samantalang kinukuha lang naman natin o ina-access lang natin yung value noong private field na student ID at student name. Kasi po sa taas, they are declared as private. So, therefore, you cannot easily get the, the values of them since they are in a private mode. So, this time, you have to create the accessor method for that, enable for you to get the values of those numbers and strings. So, this is an example of an accessor method. Okay, I hope you guys have learned something on this. If you have like questions about accessor method, please do write them down and make sure na maitanong nyo sa akin kung ano man yung tanong na yan para ma-address natin siya kaagad. So, you may write or type your questions on our chat box while I am having this discussion, and then later on, we will answer them one by one. Okay, so on this example again, medyo i-highlight lang natin yung ilan sa mga explanations here. In this example, no, we were able to initialize the private variable SID and SName using a constructor. So ito yung constructor natin. And then, we use the getter method or accessor method as we call it to retrieve the values. Ito naman yung part na yon. Okay. As a method, can only return only one value at a time. So, kaya dito, hindi natin pwedeng sabay na i-return yung SID and SName sa isang method. So, on this part naman, no, dito sa ating main method, sa baba. So, sa ating main method, ginamit natin itong main method natin to actually assign or create the instance of the object for our student class to assign the value of those student ID and student name. And of course, tinawag natin or in-invoke natin yung accessor method to print the student ID and student name. So, actually, not to print, but to get the value para ma-print mo yung values na yon. So, ito na po yung ating accessor method. So, let us go ahead and proceed to the next example. So, on the next example, we will be talking about the mutator method. So, in the mutator method, to have like this a brief discussion regarding it. This method returns or read the instance variables, and also we can use this to modify those values. We can easily identify it because sabi ko nga kanina, ito ay ginagamitan ng word na set. It is also known as setters or modifiers. So let me go ahead and show you an example demonstration of the mutator in Java. Okay, so far, meron na tayong na-create na program here a while ago. So, I am going to remove it. And then, create na lang tayo again ng program from scratch. So, program to demonstrate mutator in Java. So, again, katulad lang nung scenario kanina yung gagawin natin, makikreate tayo ng student class. And then, ang gagawin po natin, declare lang tayo ng private variables, katulad nung kanina, declare private spelling private class variables. Ang tatawagin uli natin sila na SID and SName, no? Private integer SID, private string SName. So, katulad nung kanina yung gagawin natin. The only difference is that this time, hindi na natin basta ina-access lang yung content nila. Ang gagawin na natin is to get the value of it, and if we wanted to modify, then we'll do that using the mutator method. Okay, so dito po sa part na to, ang gagawin natin is the mutator method to set multiple details. So, we use the public void and then set details. So, maglalagay ako ng parameter ko na S ulit. String naman for the N. So, ito na yung parameters natin para student ID and the student name. So, sa loob ng ating method body, ilalagay natin dito yung pag-print out natin ng pag-print out natin system.out.println. So, papakita lang natin sa screen ng user na nakapasok siya sa loob ng setter method natin. So, this will just test, no, itong part na to, this will just test na successful yung ating pag-access doon sa what we call that, pagpasok natin sa ating setter method. So, the next one is, of course, accessing class variable using the this keyword. So, katulad nung ginawa natin a while ago sa ating uh, example a while ago sa constructor, we will use the this keyword to assign the value of SID dun sa S, which will eventually comes from your main method, or pwede din naman sa method na gagawin mo pa. So, depende na lang din sa requirements. And this time, para naman sa S name or student name, which has a variable N. Dahil ito yung ginamit natin sa taas, no? S and N. Ina-assign natin yung value na meron sila papunta kay private integer SID at private integer SN. So, dito hindi na natin kailangang ilagay yung buong line na to, because what we're telling is we're actually accessing a private variable. So, this is the way to do that. The next thing that we're going to do is, of course, yun pong ating main method na, no? Punta na tayo sa baba. So, create na tayo ng ating main method. So, let me just scroll down there. So, yung ating main method, of course, public static void main string args. So, again, dahil non-static method yung kinreate natin, kailangan muna natin create ng instance ng object ng ating instance. So, ang pangalan ng ating class name is student. Again, baka nakalimutan nila yan. Ito po yan, student. And then, create lang tayo ng identifier natin, which is the object. Use the new keyword and then the student name. So, a while ago, kung naalala nyo, dito ako naglagay ng values ng ating student ID at student name. This time, hindi natin yung gagawin kasi meron tayong mutator method to do that. Right? So, if you remember, may mutator method tayong kinreate dito to set the details of the student ID and the student name. So, in this case, call na natin yung mutator method to set the value of student number. So, dahil obj yung ginamit natin na object name, obj yung ilalagay natin dito, then we are going to set the details by calling the set details method. And then, dito natin ilalagay sa loob yung pangalan ng ating yung student ID natin, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at yung pangalan ng ating student. Okay, so now, dito, meron lang slight difference, no? Remember that we are actually creating a mutator method. So, yung mutator method natin is ito na. Now, nagsiset siya or nag-access siya ng details. Kaya, ibig sabihin, pwede mo din itong i-modify using the same process. Kung ano man yung gusto mong baguhin sa student ID, sa student number, you do this to fix that problem. Now, dito, maliban na lang yung output kasi if you will take a look at this example, the example natin is only setting the values of your student ID and the student name. And to prove that this happened, nagpa-print out tayo ng inside the setter method. So, kapag nakita natin ito sa ating outcome, that means we are successful in setting the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and Andrea into variable SID and SName. So, let's run the program. Okay, so since there are no problems encountered, wala naman tayong namaling program dun sa ating main coding area, nagkaroon na tayo ng outcome na inside the setter method. So, this might be a little bit confusing dahil wala naman tayong ibang ginawa, but if you're going to read the program, you should know how to read it without really running it on a compiler. Wala naman tayong ibang ginawa talaga in this, aside from setting the details, but to print out the inside the setter methods string into the screen of your user. So this is an example of an mutator method. So, let's highlight kung bakit ba ginagamit yung mutator methods, no? In Java, mutator method are used para baguhin yung properties ng object. So, in other words, this mutator method initialize or change the value of the instance variable of the class or a private variable of the class. So, katulad na rin yung nabanggit ko kanina. Hence, we can say that mutator method is used to provide encapsulation. Ang encapsulation na yan is one of the main components while Java is actually an object-oriented programming. So, as we progress, ang encapsulation, may di-discuss pa naman natin yun. So, but to simply say it, encapsulation hide the details of your program, these details that are very important for the programmer, which is should not be known by the user. Kaya ginagamitan natin sila ng concept na encapsulation. And in Java, with the power of object-oriented programming, that is really possible. So also, a mutator method is again known as setter method or modifiers. So in a general convention, or it is rather a general convention to write the mutator methods name beginning with the set. Kaya tayo po ay gumamit ng set details na pangalan so that they are easily spotted in the class. So pag nakita mo daw yung set, yung get, you're already telling yourself and other readers of your program that you are that you have created an accessor and mutator method. So, mutator method to add must be declared as public methods. Kaya gumamit tayo ng access modifier na public. Although, mutator methods do not have any return type. So, kaya kung mapapansin nyo, wala naman siyang return na keyword. Katulad nung example natin kanina sa accessor, meron siyang return type. So, but they can accept, however, although wala silang return type, pwede naman silang mag-accept pa rin ng parameters katulad nito, int s and string n. Well, depending on the data type of that private variable. So, ibig sabihin, kung meron ka ditong integer din at string na variable, then it will accept the same parameters or set of parameters. So thereafter, it will access the private variable using keyword this, this, and it sets the value as received in the parameter. So, ito na yung part na yun, no? Ito yung parameter natin, sinet natin yung value on the section. So now, we can write more than one mutator. So, ibig sabihin, kung meron ka ng isa, you're not limited to just one mutator method, but you have to do it with the different names inside the class. Okay, so again, kapag mutator, magkaiba po yung pangalan na dapat gamitin. So, that's the summary for the mutator method. So, for the next topic that we will be talking about is all about method overloading. So, a while ago kasi na-mention ko na ang mutator method, pwede kang mag-create ng multiple mutator methods in your class, pero magkakaiba yung pangalan. Now, this time, in Java, ina-accept naman niya yung sinasabi natin o tinatawag na method overloading. So, ang method overloading kasi guys is you are allowed to create multiple methods with the same name, but they must have different parameters. So, for example, on the screen that on our screen, nag-create ka ng pangalan ng method mo, pare-pareho, my method, my method. But if you will take a look at it closely, yung return type niya here at yung number of parameters niya ay magkakaiba. So, that is allowed. Bakit nga ba kailangan gumamit ng overloading or kailan siya dapat gamitin? Now, so i-explain po natin yun, and of course, magbibigay tayo ng example to better understand how do we create or do method overloading. So For this method overloading, instead of defining two methods that should do the same thing, kung yung isa lang naman yung purpose nun, it is better to overload. So, okay daw na pareho na lang yung pangalan kasi isa lang naman yung purpose ng program. So, on this example that I am going to show you, let me go here, no? On this example, makikita nyo na meron tayong dalawang methods. Magkaiba yung pangalan nila. Please take note. Let me zoom it in. No? Meron tayong sum of int or sum of integer for short. And then meron din tayong sum of double. However, inside the body of the method, you will see that they just have the same purpose, which is to add x and y value. Now, sabi nga kanina, if you are just creating different methods with the same purpose, mag-overload na lang daw po tayo. So, before we actually go ahead and make an overloading method, let me discuss further yung kabuuan ng program para mamaya, ang ipapakita ko na lang sa inyo is yung paano to gawa ng method overload. And so, yung ating main method, dito sa loob nito, on line 12, we declared num1 variable as an integer, and then we call the method sum of int, and our arguments 8 and 5 has been thrown to this parameter, integer x and integer y. So, therefore, ang value ni x ay 8 at ang value ni y ay 5. So, once it's added, ang magiging sum nun is 13, no? So, 13. Now, ang atin namang sumunod na line, on 13, nag-declare naman tayo ng variable which is double, and we name it as num2. And then, we call our sum of double method to pass these arguments, which is 4.3 and 6.26. Now, remember that a double data type can handle numbers with decimals. So, that is why we have an example like that here. So, in this case, since we call the sum of double method, we are actually calling this one. And then these arguments, 4.3, will be passed into double x variable and 6.26 a double y variable. And then, of course, once we add the two of this, we should be getting 10.59-ish or 50.6 supposedly kung nila-round up. However, since ito naman ay Java compiler, most likely, ang i-return niya yung eksaktong digits or decimal places. So, then the next thing that we did was to print out integer sum and the double sum, and we concatenate num1 and num2 since we already use these variables as the container of the sum of integers and sum of the double methods. So once we run this program, the output will be like this. So int 13 double 10.55999. However, this is not yet an example of method overloading. I'm just telling you that this is an example of two different methods with the same purpose. So, doon na papasok yung ating tinatawag ng method overloading. So, please take note that multiple methods can have the same name as long as the number of the parameters are different. So, ngayon, mag-a-apply na tayo ng tinatawag nating method overloading on this example. So, let us go back ahead to our program. So, a program to demonstrate method overloading in Java. And let me erase a couple of this program. Okay, so for this example, ang itatawag na lang siguro natin sa method natin kasi kanina sum of int tsaka sum of method. Isang pangalan na lang ang i-assign natin which we are going to call plus or addition method na lang. Addition method. So, for this one, create na lang muna tayo ng class natin. Hold on. Ito lang pala, burahin lang natin itong loob mo. So, class additions. Alright. Then, create tayo ng static integer plus method. So, katulad ng nabanggit ko kanina, no? Meron tayong class method. So, dahil yung example natin kanina on the slide is gumamit sila ng num1 and num2 and x plus y rather para dun sa first number and second number. Yun na lang din ang gagawin ko rito. So, integer x, integer y. Then, katulad lang nung example a while ago, same lang siya, x plus y. Then, pinagkaiba lang naman kasi nitong dalawa na to is yung data type, no? Tsaka yung return type. Yung return type, double. Yan lang yung technically pinagkaiba. So, let me finish the program. Double x, double y. Dito, integer x, integer y, and then the plus method. So, they're technically the same. Pero, magkaiba lang ang data type. Now, punta na tayo sa ating main method here. Right? Sa main method natin, baka lang ng konti. Sa main method natin is, parin ko lang muna ito. Create muna tayo ng integer variable na katulad ng kanina. So, as you remember na meron tayo nito, num1, num2, integer num1. At dito natin tatawagin yung plus method natin na may integer parameters. So, dito, mag-a-assign tayo ng value nila, which is, let's say, 10 and 66. And then, dito naman, gagawa tayo ng same process lang for num2. Pero, para naman to sa plus method natin na double. Let's say 12.22 and 9.19. Alright, so, same process. Ipapaprint out natin yung dalawa to check if this is actually working. Integer. Tapos, i-add lang natin yung num1 variable. Ito yun. And then, same process for num2. Siyempre, mag-modify lang tayo dito ng kaunti. At don't forget to change it to num2. So, this is technically the same as this example over here. Pero, gumamit na tayo dito ng tinatawag nating method overloading. So, let's run this one. Alright, meron ako dito nakalimutan. No? So, cannot find the symbol and num1. Ay, ito kasi. Nasobrahan ako ng doon sa plus method. Siyempre, hindi nga naman niya makikita yung plus method. Kaya ayusin natin and run the program again. Alright, so ito na yung ating outcome. Let me rerun it, ha? So, ito na yung ating outcome. Integer 76, double is 22.1. So, this is how we actually do a method overloading in Java. So, in this example, we overload the plus method. Again, no? Let me go back. In this example, we overload the plus method by using the same name with different parameters and return type ng data. So, it will work both in integer and double method. So, as long as you have the correct argument to be submitted or to be passed over to your parameters. So again, nagana to kapag tama yung arguments na nakalagay. So if you enter an incorrect argument here, incomplete argument over here, then your program is not gonna run successfully. And this is it for our method overloading. Okay, so let me just zoom it out. Before we actually go ahead and read the summary for this lesson, let me tell you first, why do we actually need method overloading, no? So, again, actually, na-mention ko naman to, but to further explain on it, suppose that you have to perform the same process, no? Katulad ito, addition of the given numbers, but there can be any number of arguments. So you are not sure if your user will enter an integer or a number with a decimal place, katulad po nito. So in order to accomplish the task, you can create two methods. Like let's say sum katulad ng kanina, sum of integer, sum of double. However, other programmers as well as you in the future may get confused as the behavior of both methods are the same but they differ by name. So the better way to accomplish this task is by overloading them, and depending upon the argument passed, one of the overload methods is called. This helps to increase the readability of your program. Now, hindi lang naman all the time na parameters lang ang naiiba at yung return type lang. So, katulad nito, dalawang parameters pareho meron. Pero magkaiba ng return type yung inyong method. Pwede din tayong mag-perform ng method overloading by changing the number of parameters. So, for example, ito, dalawang parameters, dito, isang parameter lang. So, to further show one example like that, again, an overloading by changing the number of parameters, let us go ahead and back to our compiler dito. Still, ang gina-demonstrate natin is method overloading. But this one is like an overloading by changing the number of parameters. So, palitan ko na lang siguro to. No? Method overloading. Para kung ito-copyhin nyo man is mas madali nyo ma-recall na, this is an example for method overloading. Alright, so, gawa naman tayo ng ibang way, no? Ibang way ng pagpo-program para meron kayong maraming examples to do it. So, this time, gawa ko ng private static void display. So, int is, meron lang ako dito isang parameter na ilalagay at ang purpose ng aking program or method is to display the argument. No, we send that out, that print line. Yung argument, saan manggagaling yun? Sa main method. Arguments. So, plus argument 1. So, mamaya makikreate ako ng argument 1 na variable para dito. So, later on na lang siya. Ay, sorry. Ang ginamit ko palang variable ay a file. And then, gagamit ko rin ako ng the same name, display method ang pangalan, pero dalawa yung aking argument naman. Argument 1 and argument 2. And this time, ang ipapa-output natin is argument 1, add natin yung value ni 1, plus, lagay na ako dito ng space, and then, argument 2. Maglagay na lang ako dito ng parang barrier na para hindi masyadong nakakalito. Argument 2, then i-concatenate ko yung value ni arg2. Alright. Then, punta na tayo sa main method natin. Let me just scroll it down. Main method natin, papalitan natin dito to. Kasi tatawagin lang natin yung ating mga methods na kinreate. Ito na yung pag-output na sa taas na. Mag-a-assign lang tayo ng argument natin na 100 at dun sa isa is has 2 arguments. So, dito 200 and 300. Alright, so let us run this. Kung walang problem, mag-run siya ng tama. Kung hindi, mag-debug tayo. Okay, so yan. Dahil tinawag natin yung ating display 1, inassign natin yung value na 100, in-output ngayon ng ating this first display method, yung argument 100 at yung argument 200 and 300, the following lang na tinawag uli natin yung ating method. So, this is our final outcome. For this example, which is overloading by changing the number of parameters. So, yun po yung ating example. Actually, sa data type, meron din tayong example dyan. Kaya, let's say, kanina, parehong numbers yung ginawa natin, no? Pwede din tayong magkaroon ng, tawag dito, ng method overloading by changing the data types. So, kanina, sa example ko, integer and double. Ngayon, ang gagamitin natin, integer and string. So, dito, palitan ko lang yung ating program. Overloading by changing the data type naman ito. Data types of parameters. Okay, so, siguro same na lang yung gagamitin ko, no? Dahil same number of arguments tayo and parameters. Papalitan ko na lang yung aking, tawag doon, yung aking variable name. So, gagawin ko lang siyang arg. Pero itong isa, string. So, ito integer, ito string. So, this time, edit lang natin to. Yan. String argument and integer argument. Para mas madali nating makilala kung ano ba yung display ng ating compiler. Pero syempre, nasa inyo naman yun, no? Kung paano nyo siya i-display. Kung kayo ay unang magde-declare nitong value na ito, for example, gagawin nyo siyang Andrea, and then dito sa ilalim is the integer. So, kayo ang masusunod. Yun ang susundin ng compiler nyo. Una niyang i-declare yung string kaysa dun sa integer na argument. So, if there will be no errors here, let's proceed na. So, method overloading with an integer. Lalagay ko dito ha, para mas maalala nyo. With an integer parameter, and then, ito namang isa, method overloading with a string parameter. So, let's run the program. Okay. So, hindi pa natin napapalitan ito pala sa program natin. Let us just go back, no? So, remember na ito ay arg na lang. Alright, so string argument, Andrea, integer argument, 200. So we were able to accomplish on this example an overloading by changing the data types of parameters. So pangalawa na yan, no, sa nadi-discuss natin kanina, overloading by changing the number of parameters. Ngayon naman, overloading by changing the data type of the parameters. So, For the last example that we are going to demonstrate, siguro mag-ano na lang tayo, create na lang tayo ng like a real world example na pwedeng mangyari, like formatting numbers. So parang ang gagawin natin is method overloading to format numbers with different data types. So parang from an integer number, a double value, or string value. So, ito, katulad halos ng gagawin natin example na susunod, ang method overloading with different data types. Okay, so, ito, ganito pa naman. Alright, so, una ko munang gagawin is to create another method. So, dito ay string. Gagawin ko tong string lahat. Ang return type. Pero, yung data type ng ating parameter is iba-iba. So, format number. So, pangalan ng ating method ay format num. Then, yung int value. So, papareturn lang natin itong value ng string string.format. Tapos gagamit tayo ng decimal or double rather. Decimal value. Alright, so we are done with our example. As you can see, this has been displayed like this. Let us go ahead and go back to our example now. Sa atin, meron tayong different data types that has been used here. An integer, double, and the last one is the string. So we were able to create different data types or use different data types with the same method name. So, ito yung ating method overloading. As you can see, gumamit tayo ng certain formatting for the numbers. So, dito, we are expecting no decimal value. In this one, we are expecting decimal values with 3 decimal places. So, yun yung ibig sabihin ng 0.3f, a floating number with 3 decimal places, and then it will also automatically round up the value of whatever you're going to place here. So, dito, dahil naglagay ako ng 9.9999, nakita nyo naman, I have 4 decimal places here. Dahil sinet ko yung value niya here sa aking method with 3 decimal places only, a floating number, ginawa yun ng ating program. Plus, nag-round up na rin siya ng value to 100 instead of displaying 99.999. So, the other one, however, is for the string value. Now, if you can see, hindi natin directly display yung value na yon. Why? Since this value is actually a number and your data type is actually a string, unfortunately, there will be incompatibilities of data type used here. So, therefore, we are going to use the double method. Itong double method po natin is an example of a standard library method available in Java para gamitin. So, tayo, hindi na natin kailangan mag-create ng ganitong method dahil available na siya sa library ni Java. So, it's also a method that we are using to access the procedure of changing the value into a digit. So, in this case, inassign na natin siya ng point to floating, meaning dalawang decimal place ang meron dapat dito. So, ang nilagay natin na input here is a string 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, technically, mukha siyang hindi siya number, pero mukha siyang number. Kasi, technically, it's a string, which can be a combination of numbers and letters. So, in this case, the output becomes from this, with point to floating point, we were able to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 with 2 decimal places. So, this is what could be a real world example would look like. So, please take note that you can also overload constructors in a similar way like methods. Pero syempre, wala pa naman tayo din talaga sa ating topic about constructors. So, what I wanted to highlight to you guys on the important points on method overloading is to make sure that 2 or more methods can have the same name inside the same class if they accept different arguments. And that's what we call method overloading, no? Obviously. And we can achieve a method overloading by either changing the number of arguments, katulad ng pinakita natin, or changing the data types of the arguments. And it is not overloading if we only change the return type of the methods. There must be differences in the number of parameters. Okay, so yun po yung takeaway and important points here natin in method overloading. To summarize our discussion, so that's actually the end of our discussion for today. In this lesson, we were able to understand that static method is a method that belongs to a class rather than the instance of a class. The method is accessible to every instance of a class, but methods can be defined in an instance are only able to access by that object of a class. We also discuss the two types of instance method, which are accessor or the getters and mutator as setters or modifiers. In method overloading, suppose that you have to perform the condition or the addition of given numbers, but there can be any number of arguments. So let's say either 2 to 3 arguments for simplicity. In order to accomplish that task, you can create two methods like sum2num with two integer data types and sum3num with three integer parameters for 2 and 3 parameters respectively. However, other programmers maybe as well with you in the future may get confused with this behavior. So that is why we need to accomplish this task by overloading methods. And depending upon the argument passed, one of the overloaded methods is called. So again, this will help to increase the readability of the program. So for further readings and references of this lesson, please refer to the following websites. Thank you and see you next week.